The crack of a whip silenced the body saloon as Grace Langley felt her heart stop, knowing her fate hung in the balance of men whose souls were as barren as the Wyoming desert that stretched beyond the town of Wickenburg in 1875. Dust-covered boots and spurs clinked against wooden floorboards as Outlaws pushed her onto a rickety table, her wrists bound with coarse rope that bit into her skin. "Gentlemen," bellowed a man with a pockmarked face and tobacco-stained teeth, "tonight we got ourselves a special auction." This fine specimen just arrived on the eastbound coach. City girl with proper manners and soft hands. Grace struggled against her bindings, honey blonde hair falling across her face as she fought back tears. 3 weeks ago, she had been safely ensconced in her Boston home, planning to teach at a frontier school. Now she stood as property to be sold to the highest bidder after the stagecoach had been ambushed by the notorious Blackwell gang. Starting bid is $50. The outlaw shouted, yanking Grace's arm upward like she was livestock. The crowd of miners, cowboys, and drifters erupted in a chorus of catcalls and bids, the numbers climbing as Grace closed her eyes, trying to block out the horror of her situation. She had come west with dreams of independence and adventure, not to be bartered away like cattle. 75, shouted a bearded miner. 80, countered a cattle driver missing 3 fingers. 100, called a sweaty man whose eyes roamed over Grace with undisguised lust. The saloon doors swung open, sending a blast of cool night air through the smoky room. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the darkness, his broad shoulders casting a long shadow across the sawdust-covered floor. The crowd parted instinctively as the man strode forward, spurs jingling with each deliberate step. Wade Addison's ice-blue eyes surveyed the scene, his weathered face betraying no emotion. The room fell silent as he approached the makeshift auction block, his hand resting casually on the Colt revolver at his hip. "This ain't right," Wade said, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the now hushed saloon. "The lady isn't for sale," the pockmarked outlaw sneered. "She is if I say she is, Cowboy, unless you're aiming to outbid these fine gentlemen." Wade studied Grace's face, noting the determination behind her fear. Without breaking eye contact with her, he removed his worn leather hat and tossed it onto the floor with a thud. Inside was everything he owned, the earnings from 3 months of cattle driving. "Everything I have," Wade announced. "And if that's not enough, I'll add my heart to the bargain." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the crowd, but died quickly under Wade's steely gaze. "Your heart," mocked the outlaw. "What good is that to me?" "It means I'll hunt you to the ends of this earth if you don't accept my offer and leave this woman be," Wade replied, each word measured and deadly serious. The outlaw's hand twitched toward his gun, but he froze when he recognized Wade. Stories of Wade Addison's lightning-fast draw had spread throughout the territory. "Count it," the outlaw demanded, suddenly nervous. Wade never shifted his gaze as the barkeep hurried over and counted the money spilling from the upturned hat. $342, announced the barkeep. The outlaw's eyes widened. It was more than he'd expected to get for the girl. With a grunt, he pushed Grace toward Wade, nearly causing her to fall. Wade caught her arm gently, steadying her. "You all right, miss?" Grace nodded, unable to speak as relief flooded through her. The cowboy turned to the outlaw. "Cut her loose." The ropes fell away, and Grace rubbed her chafed wrists. Wade bent to retrieve his hat, placing it back on his head before guiding Grace toward the door with a light touch on her elbow. "This isn't over, Addison," the outlaw called after them. Wade paused but didn't turn around. "For your sake, Blackwell, I hope it is." Outside, the night air felt clean after the stifling saloon. Stars speckled the vast Wyoming sky as Wade led Grace to a hitching post where a magnificent chestnut stallion waited patiently. "Thank you," Grace finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "No decent man would leave a lady in there," Wade replied simply. "Name's Wade Addison. I ranch about 15 miles west of town, Grace Langley. I came to teach at the school in Wickenburg. Wade's expression softened slightly. Well, Miss Langley, I reckon your first lesson in the West wasn't what you expected. Despite everything, Grace felt a small smile form. No, Mr. Addison, it certainly wasn't. The school's on the other side of town. I'll take you there, Wade said, untying his horse. This is Copper. He's steady enough for both of us. Wade mounted first, then reached down to help Grace up behind him. She hesitated only a moment before accepting his hand and settling behind him on the horse. Hold on, he instructed, and Grace tentatively placed her hands on his sides. As they rode through the darkened streets, Grace felt the steady rhythm of Wade's breathing. Why did you do it? Pay all that money for a stranger. Wade was silent for a moment. Money's just money, can always earn more. Some things, though. He paused. Some things shouldn't happen, not even out here where the law's stretched thin. You said you added your heart to the bargain, Grace said softly. That was a poetic thing for a cowboy to say. Wade's shoulders tensed slightly. Just words to make a point. Don't read too much into it, Miss Langley. They arrived at a small white building with a bell tower that gleamed in the moonlight. Adjacent stood a modest cabin with a lamp burning in the window. That'll be Mrs. Peterson waiting up, Wade explained. She's the widow who boards the schoolteachers. Good woman. Wade helped Grace dismount, his hands strong and sure around her waist. Mrs. Peterson will look after you. I'll come by tomorrow to make sure you're settling in. Your money, Grace began. I'll find a way to repay you, Wade shook his head. That's not necessary. It is to me, she insisted. I won't be indebted to anyone, Mr. Addison, not even my rescuer. A ghost of a smile touched Wade's lips. Stubborn, aren't you? All right, Miss Langley, we'll figure something out tomorrow. The door to the cabin opened, revealing a plump, gray-haired woman holding a lantern high. Land sakes, is that the new teacher? We'd given up hope when you didn't arrive on the afternoon coach. She ran into some trouble, Mrs. Peterson, Wade called. The Blackwell gang. Mrs. Peterson hurried down the steps, clucking her tongue in dismay. Those awful men. Come inside, dear, you need hot food and rest. Grace turned to Wade. Thank you again, Mr. Addison. Wade touched the brim of his hat. Till tomorrow, Miss Langley. As he rode away, Grace watched his silhouette disappear into the darkness, wondering about the quiet cowboy with the ice-blue eyes who had thrown down his hat and perhaps truly offered his heart. True to his word, Wade returned the next afternoon. Grace had spent the morning being shown around the schoolhouse by Mrs. Peterson, trying to focus on her teaching duties rather than the traumatic events of the previous night. When she spotted Wade approaching on horseback, her heart quickened unexpectedly. He had cleaned up since yesterday, his dark hair combed back, wearing a fresh shirt under his leather vest. Miss Langley, he greeted, removing his hat as he dismounted. You're looking better today. Amazing what a night of safety can do, she replied with a small smile. Would you like to come in for coffee? Mrs. Peterson just brewed a fresh pot. Wade glanced at the schoolhouse. Actually, I was hoping you might like to see a bit of the countryside, get acquainted with your new home. I'd like that, Grace said, surprising herself with how quickly she agreed. Let me fetch my bonnet. Minutes later, they were riding double on Copper again, but this time Grace felt more at ease with her arms around Wade's waist. Sheriff came by my place this morning, Wade said as they crested a small hill overlooking a meadow bursting with wildflowers. Blackwell and his men cleared out of town after our encounter. Will they be back? Wade's jaw tightened. Maybe, but the sheriff's organizing a posse. Those men have been terrorizing the territory too long. He guided Copper to a stop beneath a large cottonwood tree. This is what I wanted to show you. The view took Grace's breath away. Rolling hills stretched toward distant mountains, the landscape painted in shades of gold, rust, and green. A river glinted like a silver ribbon in the valley below. It's beautiful, she whispered. This is the real West, Wade said softly. Not what you experienced last night. They dismounted, and Wade spread a blanket under the tree. From his saddlebag, he produced a small bundle of food, bread, cheese, and dried apples. A welcoming picnic, he explained. Proper introduction to Wyoming. As they ate, Grace studied Wade. In the daylight, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, evidence of years squinting against the sun. His hands were calloused and strong, yet he handled the food with surprising gentleness. "How long have you been in Wyoming?" she asked. "Came here after the war," Wade replied. "Fought for the Union, couldn't go back home to Pennsylvania afterward. Too many ghosts." "I'm sorry," Grace said. Wade shrugged. "Found peace out here, built my ranch from nothing, got good cattle, good grazing land." "And are you alone on your ranch?" Grace asked, then blushed at her boldness. A small smile touched Wade's lips. "Got a few hands who help with the cattle, but if you're asking if there's a Mrs. Addison, the answer's no." "I wasn't, you were," he said, his eyes twinkling, "and it's a fair question." They fell into comfortable conversation as the afternoon stretched on. Grace told him about her life in Boston, her parents' passing that had left her free to pursue her own path, her desire to make a difference by teaching children on the frontier. "You're braver than most men I know," Wade commented. "Coming all this way alone." "Not brave enough," Grace admitted. "I was terrified last night," Wade's expression darkened. "That wasn't about bravery. No one should face what you did." As the sun began its descent, Wade reluctantly suggested they head back to town. During the ride, Grace found herself leaning closer to him than strictly necessary, drawn to his solid presence and warmth. At the schoolhouse, Wade helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than before. "I've been thinking about your insistence on repaying me," he said. "Yes," Grace looked up at him expectantly. "My ranch hands are terrible cooks. I was thinking maybe once a week you might ride out and cook a proper meal, just until you feel the debt settled." Grace smiled. "I think that could be arranged. Though I should warn you, my cooking skills aren't legendary. Can't be worse than Rusty's beans and bacon," Wade chuckled. "I'll come fetch you on Saturday if that suits." "Saturday it is," Grace agreed, as Wade rode away, Mrs. Peterson appeared in the doorway, an amused expression on her kind face. Well, I haven't seen Wade Addison take an interest in anyone since he came to these parts." "He's just being neighborly," Grace protested, her cheeks warming. Hum," Mrs. Peterson hummed knowingly. "That man hasn't had a home-cooked meal from a woman in years. Not for lack of offers, mind you." That night, as Grace prepared for her first day of teaching, she found her thoughts drifting repeatedly to the quiet cowboy with ice-blue eyes. The next morning, the schoolhouse filled with 20 curious children ranging from 6 to 16 years old. Grace threw herself into teaching, finding joy in their eager faces and quick minds. The days passed quickly as she settled into her new role and community. By Saturday, Grace was both nervous and excited about her visit to Wade's ranch. When he arrived to collect her, she had a basket packed with the ingredients for a hearty stew and fresh bread, courtesy of Mrs. Peterson's well-stocked pantry. The Rockinga Ranch spread across a beautiful valley, with a sturdy log cabin nestled against a backdrop of pine trees. Several outbuildings and corrals completed the homestead, with cattle grazing on the distant hillsides. "It's wonderful," Grace said as they approached. "You've built all this yourself," pride flickered across Wade's face. "Started with just the small cabin there. Added on as I could afford it." 3 cowboys emerged from the bunkhouse as they arrived, curiosity evident on their weathered faces. "Boys, this is Miss Langley, the new schoolteacher," Wade introduced. "Miss Langley, these are my hands Rusty, Emmett, and Tom." The men removed their hats, nodding respectfully. Rusty, the oldest of the 3 with a shock of red-gray hair, stepped forward. "Madam, if you're here to improve our cooking situation, you're an angel sent from heaven," Grace laughed. "I'll do my best, though Mr. Addison may regret his arrangement." Wade showed her around the ranch before leading her to the main house. Inside was surprisingly comfortable, with solid, handcrafted furniture and bookshelves lined with volumes that suggested Wade was more well-read than his cowboy appearance might indicate. In the kitchen, Grace unpacked her basket while Wade built up the fire in the stove. "Those are a lot of books for a rancher," she commented, Wade looked almost embarrassed. "Winter nights are long. Reading passes the time." As Grace prepared the meal, Wade set the table and they fell into easy conversation. She discovered he had a dry sense of humor and thoughtful opinions on everything from cattle breeding to politics. When the ranch hands joined them for dinner, the atmosphere was jovial. The men told stories that had Grace laughing until her sides hurt, and Wade watched her with a warmth in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. After the meal, the hands thanked her profusely before returning to the bunkhouse, leaving Grace and Wade alone. "Thank you," Wade said quietly as they washed dishes together. "It's been a long time since this place felt like a home." The simple statement touched Grace deeply. "It was my pleasure, truly." As they stood side by side, their hands occasionally brushing in the dishwater, Grace felt a tension building between them, a pleasant, anticipatory feeling that made her both nervous and exhilarated. When it came time to leave, Wade helped her into her coat, his fingers grazing the nape of her neck. "I'd like to see you before next Saturday," he said, his voice lower than usual. Grace turned to face him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "I'd like that too." The ride back to town was quiet, both lost in their thoughts. At the schoolhouse, Wade held her hand a moment longer than necessary after helping her down. "Good night, Miss Langley." "Good night, Mr. Addison." That night, Grace lay awake, replaying every moment of the day, wondering if what she was feeling could possibly be the beginning of love. Over the next few weeks, Wade found numerous reasons to visit Wickenburg. He attended the Sunday socials, sat through a school recital, and even volunteered to repair the schoolhouse roof. Each time, he and Grace found moments to be alone, their conversations growing deeper, more personal. On her weekly visits to the ranch, Grace's cooking improved, and so did the atmosphere of the place. She brought curtains for the windows, flowers for the table, and a warmth that had nothing to do with the hearth fire. One Saturday in late October, Wade suggested a ride to show her a special place on his property. They followed a narrow trail through a stand of pines until they reached a small, secluded lake that reflected the mountains like a mirror. "It's magnificent," Grace breathed. "Not many people know about this spot," Wade said, helping her dismount. "I come here to think." They walked along the shore, the crisp autumn air filling their lungs. When they stopped to rest on a fallen log, Wade's expression grew serious. "Grace," he began, using her first name for the first time, "I need to tell you something." Her heart quickened. "Yes. The sheriff got word that Blackwell's gang has been spotted near Cheyenne. They've been robbing stagecoaches again." Grace's stomach tightened with fear. "Do you think they'll come back here?" "I don't know," Wade admitted, "but I want you to be careful. Don't travel alone." "I won't," she promised, touched by his concern. Wade took her hand in his. "When I saw you in that saloon." He paused, struggling with his words. "Something happened to me. I knew I had to protect you, not just that night, but always." Grace's breath caught. "Wade, I know it's too soon," he continued hastily. "We've only known each other a short while, but I've never felt this way about anyone." "I feel it too," Grace admitted softly. "From that first night when you threw down your hat." Wade's eyes locked with hers, and then slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her. His lips were gentle at first, then more insistent as she responded, her hands moving to his shoulders. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Wade rested his forehead against hers. "I meant what I said that night. I did offer my heart along with everything else." "I know," Grace whispered, "and I think I've accepted both." The moment was perfect until the crack of a rifle shattered the silence. Wade reacted instantly, pulling Grace to the ground and covering her body with his as a bullet splintered the log where they'd been sitting. "Blackwell," Wade muttered, drawing his revolver. "Grace, stay down and crawl toward those rocks." 3 riders emerged from the trees across the lake, rifles raised. Grace recognized the pockmarked face of the outlaw from the saloon. "Well, ain't this sweet," Blackwell called, the teacher and her cowboy. "This is private property, Blackwell," Wade shouted, positioning himself between the Outlaws and Grace. "Ride out now and we'll forget this happened," Blackwell laughed. "Not likely, Addison. You humiliated me in front of the whole town, and I don't like losing merchandise." Grace had reached the shelter of the rocks. Wade was partially protected by a tree, but Blackwell and his men were spreading out, trying to flank them. "Grace," Wade said quietly. "Copper's trained to return to the ranch if you slap his flank hard and yell home. When I start shooting, you run for the horse and do exactly that." "I'm not leaving you," she protested. "My men will come when they hear the shots and see Copper. It's our best chance." Before she could argue further, Wade fired 2 quick shots, forcing the Outlaws to dive for cover. "Now, Grace." Heart pounding, Grace sprinted for the horse, keeping low. Behind her, gunfire erupted as Wade exchanged shots with the Outlaws. She reached Copper, slapped his flank hard, and yelled, "Home!" The horse took off at a gallop toward the ranch. Grace ducked back behind a large boulder, unwilling to leave Wade despite his instructions. The gunfight continued, with Wade methodically forcing the Outlaws back. He was a better shot, but they had him outnumbered. When one of the Outlaws tried to circle behind Wade, Grace picked up a rock and hurled it, striking the man in the head. He yelped in pain, drawing Wade's attention, who spun and fired, hitting the Outlaw in the shoulder. "I told you to go," Wade shouted when he spotted Grace. "I told you I'm stubborn," she called back. A bullet whizzed past her head, sending splinters of rock flying. Wade's face hardened and he charged toward her position, firing rapidly to provide covering fire. He reached her, grabbing her arm. "We need to move, follow me and stay low." They darted from cover to cover, working their way around the lake toward where the Outlaws' horses were tethered. If they could reach them, they could escape. Suddenly, Wade stumbled, a grunt of pain escaping his lips. Grace saw blood spreading across his left side. "Wade." She gasped, helping him behind a large tree. "Just grazed me," he assured her through gritted teeth. "Keep moving." They continued their retreat, but Wade was slowing, his breathing labored. The Outlaws sensed their advantage and pressed forward. Just as Blackwell appeared around a boulder, rifle raised, shots rang out from the direction of the ranch. Rusty and the other hands had arrived, galloping toward them with guns blazing. Outgunned, Blackwell and his remaining man retreated, disappearing into the forest. Rusty dismounted near Wade and Grace, his face grim as he examined Wade's wound. "Let's get you back to the ranch, boss," he said. "Tom's riding for the doctor." At the ranch, Grace cleaned and bandaged Wade's wound, a deep graze that had torn through muscle but missed anything vital. By the time the doctor arrived from town, Wade was resting comfortably, though he protested being confined to bed. "You could have been killed," Grace said when they were finally alone. Tears threatening to spill, Wade reached for her hand. "So could you? Why didn't you leave like I asked?" "Because I love you," she answered simply, "and I couldn't bear the thought of losing you." Wade's eyes softened. "Come here," he whispered, tugging her gently until she sat on the edge of the bed. "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "That I need a school teacher on this ranch." Grace laughed softly. "For the cattle, for our children," Wade said seriously. "Someday." Grace's heart swelled. "Mr. Addison, are you proposing to me while bleeding from a gunshot wound?" "I reckon I am, Miss Langley," he replied, a smile tugging at his lips. "Though I'd planned something more romantic," before Blackwell interrupted. "It's perfectly romantic," Grace assured him, leaning down to kiss him gently. "And yes, I'll marry you." The sheriff and his posse caught up with Blackwell and his gang 2 days later. The Outlaws would stand trial for numerous crimes, including the attempted murder of Wade Addison. Word of the engagement spread quickly through Wickenburg. Mrs. Peterson cried happy tears, while the school board regretfully began searching for a replacement teacher, as Grace would be moving to the Rocking permanently after the Christmas wedding. The ceremony took place in the town church on a snowy December afternoon. Grace wore a gown of ivory satin with Mrs. Peterson's lace veil, while Wade looked handsome and slightly uncomfortable in a new black suit. As they exchanged vows, Wade placed his mother's ring on Grace's finger. With this ring, I give you my heart this time not as a bargain, but as a gift freely given." Grace's eyes shimmered with tears as she replied, "And I give you mine in return to keep safe always." The reception at the town hall was joyous, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed the entire county. When Wade led Grace in their first dance as husband and wife, he held her close, whispering, "Did you ever imagine this would be your life when you set out from Boston?" "Never," she admitted. "But I wouldn't change a moment of it, even the terrifying parts, because they led me to you." Later that night, as they drove a sleigh back to the ranch, their home snowflakes drifted lazily from the star-filled sky. Wade wrapped a blanket around them both, his arm strong and protective around Grace's shoulders. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "throwing down my hat that night was the best decision I ever made." Grace nestled against him, "And accepting your heart was mine." Spring came early to Wyoming that year. The land turned green, wildflowers carpeted the meadows, and Grace's garden at the Rocking flourished. She had taken naturally to ranch life, learning to ride properly, helping with the accounts, and turning the cabin into a true home. On the anniversary of the day they met, Wade took Grace back to the lake, now a place of happy memories rather than danger. They picnicked on the shore, watching eagles soar overhead. "I have something to tell you," Grace said, a secretive smile playing on her lips. Wade raised an eyebrow. "What's that, Mrs. Addison?" "Come Christmas, there will be 3 of us living at the Rocking A." Wade's eyes widened as understanding dawned. His face transformed with joy as he gathered her into his arms, kissing her with all the love in his heart. "A baby," he whispered in wonder, placing a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Our future," Grace corrected, covering his hand with hers. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the water, Wade and Grace Addison stood wrapped in each other's arms, their love as vast and enduring as the Wyoming sky stretching above them, a love born in danger but flourishing in peace, proof that sometimes the most precious treasures are found in the most unexpected moments, when a cowboy throws down his hat and pays with his heart.